Kia ora and welcome to Cinema in Context, where we discuss all things film and the connections between. My name is Jeremy Downing.
I'm Sarah Watt.
And I'm William Chen.
And we're back together in the same place!
Hey.
Woo! People have been traversing the world. I'm about to head off overseas. It is a season of not being together. It's nice to be back in the same house. Each month at Cinema in Context, we discuss two films, one current and one retrospective, with some connection. It could be the same director, the same actor, or a similar theme. This month we are discussing Elvis, which came out earlier this year, and Strictly Ballroom, which came out in 1992. I should know that. 1992? Yes, I'm getting nods.
It's the 30th anniversary.
Wow, of course it is. The connection being they are both directed by Australian director Baz Luhrmann. Strictly Ballroom was his first film, and Elvis is his most recent film. And I think it's fair to say he's an auteur, so we're probably going to talk about his oeuvre as we get into this episode.
We probably are.
Please be warned that we will be spoilering both movies, so if you haven't seen either Elvis or Strictly Ballroom, then please pause this episode and come back to us at a future date. Right, Elvis, give us a bit of an introduction about this film, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. So Elvis, it's so obscure about this guy that no one's ever heard of before. It might as well have been an independent art house film. I'm just being silly. Elvis, as the name suggests, is, I would say it's a biopic, but actually I think that Luhrmann takes a few liberties, but they are exciting, ecstatic liberties, with the biopic of Elvis Presley. It is a film that takes the unusual slant of positioning the film sort of from the outside looking in, because we, the viewer, are led more by an outsider to actual Elvis Presley, and that was his longtime agent or manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who's played by Tom Hanks. And so we get to watch young Elvis and his trajectory to superstardom over the course of almost 3 magnificently exciting hours, just giving away here a little bit of how I feel about the film. And it has all the Luhrmann aspects of music and fast editing and sequence and excitement and joie de vivre.
Brilliance. Thank you, Sarah. Well, Strictly Ballroom came out, as I said, in 1992. It was based on a play that Baz Luhrmann was developing with his friends at university, and I think it was quite successful in Sydney, I believe. And an elderly couple came along to see the film. He was a producer, and they decided that they were going to back this story into a film. It was a passion project for them, and unfortunately he passed away before the film was made, and his wife was left with the choice of whether she would carry on with this, and she did. She carried on for his sake and said he would have wanted to have seen this film completed. So really a film made out of love. Though they were backing it, it wasn't a big budget, and Strictly Ballroom, the film, was born. So Strictly Ballroom follows the character of Scott Hastings, who is a young, talented, up-and-coming ballroom dancer, and the journey, really rallying against the institution who expect him to, dance only Strictly Ballroom steps, but he wants to jazz it up a bit and bring in some different moves because he doesn't feel that what has been laid down really is appropriate for how he wants to express himself. And alongside that, he meets Fran, who is a beginner in the studio, who too has her own steps. I believe she is, I don't know what culture she is. She's
Spanish.
Spanish?
Well, they're speaking Spanish language, and I think with the whole bullfighting kind of the
Pasodoble.
Yes, and the matador kind of thing that I think it's fair to say, even though they never say her surname, because he says to her, "What's your name?" Fran who? And she says, just Fran. And I'm like, well, there was an opportunity to be, But Spanish.
So Spanish, and I guess her motivation is to bring in a bit of her culture into a space that is very codified and not very welcoming of steps. And so, I guess shenanigans ensue. And the one thing I will say about Strictly Ballroom, this is not the one thing I'll say about Strictly Ballroom. I have many things to say about Strictly Ballroom. But this is one of his few films that he made before the, proliferation of computer-generated imagery, which is a big part of his later films. But this is one where we get to see how he does all of his trickery and wizardry
In camera.
In camera.
Literally, yeah.
And he does it with a team of people that he has remained working with. His wife, Christine Martin? Catherine Martin. I know they call her CM. And his music producer who works with collaboratively with lots of artists. There's sort of a team of people that have continued through his career. So, yeah, that is Strictly Ballroom.
All right.
Nice.
William, I'm going to throw the rocko to you. Where do you want to start?
Okay, I'll bounce off your point, Jeremy, about CGI. It's something that I think, as you say, becomes more and more prevalent as you go through Baz Luhrmann's works. I don't know if you guys remember Australia.
It's the only one I have not seen. Or rather, it's the only one I will not see.
Good. It is a terrible time at the movies.
Wow.
I rave. But yeah, I think I do actually think his later films don't come off as well as his previous ones. Even I think in Moulin Rouge there is a real balance between like the razzle dazzle of all the different composites and the shots and the colors, but it still feels real ? Like there's a real tactile sensibility to it, and you compare that to something like Elvis 2022.
Or Great Gatsby.
Or The Great Gatsby, yes.
Yeah.
Although I think Gatsby still has more of a veneer of reality compared to Elvis. Because is anything real in Elvis? It feels like the people are, and every single item is composited. And I don't know how you guys feel about the visuals, but that was one thing that completely took me out of the movie.
That's interesting, because as I often say, over the 5.5 million years we've been doing this podcast, I don't always notice the visuals. Like, you can have pretty bad green screen for me to then go, hang on a second. So you're talking about CGI and composite and that, and I didn't feel it quite so much. Although to me, Strictly Ballroom does feel intensely real for its kind of gritty, low budgetness. I don't mind that Elvis, though, isn't real in inverted commas, because I am not invested in the real guy. And so I went into the film kind of like, okay, well, I enjoy Baz Luhrmann. I know a few Elvis songs. I really know nothing about him, and I'm not invested in him emotionally to care about truth. And then right from the very beginning, toe tapping, I had the best time.
Wow.
And I knew that he was throwing glitter in my eyes and inveigling me, and I didn't mind. But as I say, that's because Elvis is just some mythical creature to me. So I do respect, absolutely, it might have upset other people for myriad reasons.
That's so interesting, because I kind of had the same starting point as you, Sarah. Like, I know some of Elvis's music. I don't know much of his story. I know how he died. I know about Marilyn and all that stuff. And I went into the movie quite excited because I heard some good things about it. And it was one of those rare movies where the longer it went on, and it was a very long movie, the more my negative feelings towards it started coming out.
Okay.
And I ended up being very, very both distrusting of the movie and almost despising the movie.
Okay.
Started off really positive.
So it overstayed its welcome with you.
I would definitely say so. And it's a variety of different things, and we may talk about this later on as well. But I just felt that the whole overarching focus on Colonel Parker really took so much away from the movie. I didn't like that. Something inside me likes a more, I guess, traditional approach, like what they did with Bohemian Rhapsody, just focus on the guy and everything is around him. And this felt like focusing on the evil producer character who always shows up, but he almost having more screen time probably than our focal character. And it felt really lopsided in a way that really never pans out, to me anyway.
I have versions of what you're saying, William, but as positives and critiques. So for me, I loved when the movie started and it was Colonel Parker's story. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant, because I'm so sick of the typical film. I mean, we saw Respect recently, which by all intents and purposes, great film,
it's
but
fine,
it's
right?
like the 10th one we've seen in the last 20 years. So
Mm.
I'm sick of those movies. Bohemian Rhapsody managed to get away with it by really twisting the story to give it an emotional charge. But I couldn't stand Rocket Man. I'm over the musician films. We've seen it. So I was really happy to go along for the ride with Colonel Parker as the villain of the piece. And I was like, what a great way just to show the grossness of this industry, because we see the same story every time, but this felt very different. And I loved it. I didn't have any issue with it. I was loving the film. It was like a rollicking great time. And this is spoilers, but if you haven't seen it, pause it at this point. For me, the movie ended. The emotional climax of the film was when Elvis was playing Vegas and Colonel Parker signed the contract on the tablecloth. He got everything he wanted. That's the end of the movie for me. And they needed to just quickly resolve it. I liked the scene in the basement where they're arguing, but the moment that it got to the scene where his wife's leaving him, I was like, well, we've seen this scene 100 times, and the movie went on for like a good half an hour, and then Elvis died, and I was like, oh my gosh, and it was baking hot in the cinema as well. And also we found out our friends had COVID next to us, and we were going to go into lockdown for 3 weeks after that. But anyways, I just think the movie was over at that point, and it just kept going.
But it had to keep going because his wife has to leave him because it's a true story, and he has to die in Vegas. Did he die in Vegas? Yeah. Because we know that that's what's coming.
But I mean,
so he has to do it somehow.
They can't have their cake and eat it too. Like, if you're going to make a statement that this film is about Colonel Parker, if he is the emotional core of the film, well, he was the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
And if that's the story you're going to tell, then commit to it. And I just thought the film went, like, for me it wasn't a descent. It was like loving it. Movie's over, movie's still going, we're still going, we're bored, what's going on.
That's okay. And I hear you both. People are going to be coming at this with different objections. I think the aspect of it with this whole Colonel Tom Parker business for me was Elvis is a mythical creature, and maybe I think that actually it's quite clever to be looking at him from the outside, because oh my gosh, can I just say, and I'm sure we all agree, I hope, Austin Butler, what a revelation. I hadn't seen him in anything. I've subsequently seen photographs of him blonde and natural looking. He doesn't impress me at all.
Have you not seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yeah, but I don't remember that. I mean, what was he? Just one of the kids at the ranch? He's just one of the kids at the ranch.
He's the guy that rides on the horse and chases after...
Yeah, but he's just...
I had no idea.
He's only a good-looking dude, but he looks so different to me.
He's the creepy one at the ranch. He's the one that you actually think is going to hurt Brad Pitt.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I wouldn't have remembered that at all, because the minute that you stick a black wig or black hair on him, I thought he was extraordinary. Yeah. And then to find out that it wasn't just the spoken voice, but the singing voice that he had nailed as well. I'm like, this kid. Because actually, going into the film, I was like, well, I don't know who Austin Butler is, but we'll see. We'll see about this. Is it just because he's pretty? And then actually, he bowled me over and actually got me into Elvis's music. So, I mean, there's good
I thought they did marketing. A really, really good job of the music as well. Like they brought in each of the famous songs without it feeling like a jukebox.
Yes.
Mamma Mia or Jersey Boys.
Or bring back Bohemian Rhapsody, where there was never that moment, which they do multiple times in Bohemian Rhapsody, of someone going, listen, Fred, to this, and they play the main riff to We Will Rock You or something. It's like, oh my goodness. Like, never happens in this movie.
And they mucked about with some of it and did wonderful modern remixes. I mean, I love the song with Eminem in it. It's ridiculous, but I love it. So I have no objections to all that. So all I'm saying is, it's being Colonel Tom Parker, and he was a total caricature. He was hyperbolic. It was vaguely racist. It was... whatever, but I didn't care, because I was looking at this, as I keep saying, mythical creature becoming this incredible phoenix,
They definitely captured the tragedy of Elvis. I think that it really was the tragedy of Elvis and Colonel Parker's
manipulation.
He's just a terrible person, isn't he? And they did really capture that. I thought Tom Hanks did fantastic as well.
I thought he was a little bit over the top. I mean, you guys have mentioned that his character is intentionally over the top. It was just overly theatrical in a way that I don't think some of the other performances were.
A lot of people remark on the Priscilla Presley character, and I apologise to the actress whose name I can't remember, but... people I know felt that she actually was the emotional core of the film, that her performance was the most real and heartfelt, particularly in some of the latter breakup scenes. What's her name?
Olivia de Jong.
Oh, yes. And
she was fantastic. I didn't like that breakup scene, not because of her, just because we've seen the leaving on the stairs and
sure.
But she was great. I thought the scene with them when they first fell in love in was it Japan? Were they in Japan?
Germany.
Yeah. was a really special scene.
Yeah.
I really liked how the whole thing ends. I thought that was quite good with the plane kind of flying away. It was decent.
Yeah.
Good button.
You mentioned lack of consistency of over-the-top characters. Let's talk about Strictly Ballroom.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great counterpoint.
Because it's like, they're all over the top.
No, Paul Mercurio isn't.
True, you're right.
Paul Mercurio is our straight man.
Yes, you're
actually,
right.
to be fair, Tara Maurice is Fran.
Well, but she starts off ridiculous, and then she
Yes,
slowly
you're
comes to his
absolutely
level,
because
right?
she has to be clumsy, and she has to be the ugly duckling. She has to
She has
fall over.
She has the
fast.
taking off her glasses moment.
Can you dance without those
I know,
glasses
it's
on?
so
She's
silly.
like, yes, and you're like, well, there was a dramatic opportunity wasted. What if she had said, no, I need to have them stuck on with sellotape around the back of my ears? But thankfully, she took them off.
Well, here's a question for you guys. Does Baz Luhrmann hate people? Is he a misanthrope?
Why?
Because Strictly Ballroom, this is the first time I've seen it.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for bringing it to my attention,
Yeah.
guys.
What did you
because
think,
it's-
first of all? Did you enjoy
I
it?
really, really enjoyed it. It's very much a movie of its time.
Yes.
The movie I talked to you guys about, it's like, this reminds me 100% is Babe 2, Pig in the City.
Yeah.
George Miller, because it's like, the two movies couldn't be any more different, but their aesthetics are one of the same.
Wow.
Right? They are very much highlighting kind of the ugliness of humanity.
Yeah.
Kind of having this a pure counterpoint. In one case, it's Scott. In the other case, it's the animals. Right. In this crazy Australian setting, or in Babe, it's kind of international, but it's Australia. Yeah, we know Australia. And kind of pitching the two against each other in this fight for the soul of what it means to be in Strictly Ballroom. It's dance, a dancer, and Babe, it's to be human, quote unquote. And I can totally see the two movies being watched in a double bill, and it's incredible. And Strictly Ballroom, I think, watching it was like, holy moly, this movie hates people.
I think the opposite, but yeah.
Oh, really? It's like every single character is shot in like a horrifying close-up. You can see the makeup caked on their faces.
And low angles as well.
Low angles.
Jowls and
and the lens, I don't know what kind of lens they were using, but it's to...
Well, I think they used all the lenses.
Yeah, all the...
But
it's deeply unpleasant, and intentionally so that when the purity comes out, you're like, oh, okay, this is actually really nice.
Very interesting.
I don't think he hates people. I think he's really trying to capture the institution, right?
Yes.
That's the institution of this dance world. And if you think about, most of his stories have a melodrama at their heart, and so it's playing up the villains and the tensions and the people. I mean, the mother character is incredible. Do you know she
died after it had finished filming?
She was unwell
really?
with cancer through the filming, and she didn't get to see the movie complete.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that invested into that film.
And she was amazing.
She's brilliant. She's brilliant.
I wonder whether and you'll know more than I, Jeremy, because I don't know if you know this, William, but this film is in Jeremy's top 10 films of all
goodness.
time.
Most watched movie of all time, for anyone who listened to our last episode.
Right. But so you may know this already, but given that this is Baz Luhrmann's first film, as you said, and given that it really pushes so many boundaries of Australian cinema and cinema generally, I mean, it was just rewatching it this time, which I think was the first time in 30 years, it blew my mind. All of the things that are in it that I think, oh my gosh, so many people have gone on to use that style of the mockumentary part at the beginning with the mum saying, what did I do wrong?
Yeah. Did I fail him as a mother?
Yeah, and just the beautiful mockumentary way of it all. But all I'm saying is, I've got to not talk in that accent. So sorry. All I'm saying is, to me, Baz Luhrmann and Paul Mercurio, Scott Hastings, they're the same person, right? And he's like, I want to make a film and I want to make it my way. And Scott is like, and I want to dance my way. And so maybe it isn't misanthropy generally. Maybe it isn't I hate all people, but just, as you say, Jeremy, I hate the institution, or not hate, but I'm fighting the power here.
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
In order to create my own art. Baz Luhrmann did it in '92, and it catapulted him into a whole
Yeah,
career.
it's huge.
Extraordinary
The film was
career.
huge,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
did the festival circuit in like the best way possible. I think though, like, as much as there's a critique of that world, there's a deep love of ballroom. He grew up in the ballroom world, and he's really showcasing a part of what he loves.
Yeah.
I do think this is Baz Luhrmann's best film because Romeo and Juliet is phenomenal. It's depressing though. It's a sad story, and Moulin Rouge.
That's not his fault, by the
No.
way. That was that other guy's fault.
Moulin Rouge is fantastic, but it's not
sad.
Also depressing.
Also depressing.
I love Moulin Rouge.
It's interesting you talk about Australia. So my experience with Australia, and I think I said this in the last episode, I thought again, similar to Elvis, I thought the first half I really enjoyed it. The whole driving of the cattle. And then the whole film falls to pieces and goes on for another hour and a half. But I was reading in a magazine the other day that Baz Luhrmann said that's the one film where he feels like he lost the battle with the studio and he wasn't able to make the choices that he, creatively. And he thinks that that film could hold the record for the most amount of footage filmed. And he is currently working with Indigenous artists in Australia, and they're re-editing the movie into a 4-hour miniseries called Faraway Downs. And he filmed multiple endings, and so he's got a whole lot of different stuff.
Oh my god!
And in the same, as a Vogue magazine that he co-edited, it's sitting over there in this room. He talks with Nicole Kidman, and she says, "Yeah, I remember heaps of stuff that we filmed, like significant stuff that we filmed that isn't in the film." And so I'm really interested to see how that comes together. Because the whole start of that movie is very Strictly Ballroom-esque, like her arriving on the dock and all of the Australian people talking about her and Hugh Jackman having a big fight in the thing. Yeah. The other one I'm going to bring up is The Get Down. Have you seen The Get Down?
No, and that's so explain to listeners, because it's a TV documentary.
No, it's a TV Netflix series. They made 6 episodes, and it's about the
advent of hip hop music.
Yeah, the advent of hip hop music. It's happening at the same time that graffiti art is kind of burgeoning from. I mean, it's from poverty, right, and from the communities of color in New York City. And so you've got graffiti art, you've got hip hop music, and then as the story goes on, you've got the voguing queer culture, counterculture of the gay clubs in New York. So he produces the first hour and a half, and it's one of his best things. I would say it's his second best thing, or maybe third best thing behind Romeo Juliet and Moulin Rouge. But it's really, really good. Characters are great, the pacing's great, the music's great. It's all got all the Baz Luhrmann things. Tropes. And then he hands the TV show over to someone else, and it really goes downhill.
Oh no.
The first season's okay, and in the second season I stopped watching when they kept overusing animation to tell the story, and I thought, because have you run out of budget maybe? Like, do you need to animate this to tell the story? So, yeah, first episode's wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, Strictly Ballroom is lots of fun. Like, it's really, really good. How contemporary is this to the Christopher Guest stuff? Like, is it
Christopher Guest
same time period?
Well, this is Spinal Tap came out in the 84, 80s, right? Yeah. So well after that, but Waiting For Guffman wouldn't come out until 1996, so it was 4 years before.
Oh, okay.
But it's very contemporary to Muriel's Wedding.
Right. Well, that's the film that it most made me think I want to revisit, because it has the hyperbolic characters. So like, not Tina Sparkles, the other one. The girl who
Liz Holt.
Yeah, so, the fact that she runs in and she's screaming and it's all and all that kind of thing feels very Muriel's Wedding.
And also, I think Priscilla, Queen of the Desert is another big connector of this.
A lot of the visuals are very Priscilla, I guess, because that same kind of low-budget Australian feel.
Yeah.
Well, and that flamboyant kind of
costumes.
Yeah, that's right. Feathers and sequins and lens flare and all that. I mean, it's almost lens flare, isn't it? In Strictly Ballroom. Yeah. To me, it is an imperfect film. Now, in fairness to Baz, it's a bloody good first film, and he's gone on to do amazing things. So I'm not being arbitrarily critical, but having touched upon the mockumentary aspects of it, actually, it isn't treated consistently. So we're not introduced to each of the characters with their names. Scott never talks to camera. That's fine, maybe, and neither does Fran. The mum does, and it's hilarious at the beginning. Barry Fife does a little bit.
Fran and Liz do.
Oh, does Fran?
Yep.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So
she goes, I've only been dancing for 2 years, but what I thought they did was really good. And then she goes, hi Liz, what I thought was really good. And then Liz punches her in the stomach. So she repeats what she says on the talking head.
Oh, okay. So, well, that's interesting then, that I missed that actually it was more mockumentary than I thought it was.
Yeah, just in their first little bit, their first opening sequence, which is based on a real documentary called Foxtrot to Tango, which when I used to own it on DVD was included on the DVD.
Cool.
And there's all these different characters, which feels like a Christopher Guest film.
Right.
But they're real people. You know, there's a guy with the big bulldogs, and there's couples that have got married, and there's siblings that do it, and there's this one scene with a family. So mother, father, and then 2 younger kids, so there must be 12, 13.
Yeah.
And then the mum's so overbearing, but she's great, and the dad's just sitting there just like Doug Hastings. And the mum goes, so tell she's talking to her daughter, tell them what you do. She's like, I do brownies on Monday, I do athletics on Tuesday, I do clarinet on Wednesday.
But this is a real documentary?
Yeah. Thursday, and she's like, and what do you do on Saturday? I do dancing. And then what do you do on thing? I do swimming. She's like, you like that one, don't you? She's like, yeah, I like that one.
Cute. Look, it's not a comparison with Elvis unless you find a way to make it thus. However, the Romeo and Juliet-ish sort of romance between Scott and Fran, you know, they're very much from different cultures. For a moment there, well, actually, their parents would not have wanted them to dance together or be together, just like Romeo and Juliet, just like Moulin Rouge.
Christian and Satine.
That's right. So it's the blending of worlds and all that sort of thing, isn't it?
Forbidden love. Yeah.
Yes, although Great Gatsby, not so much. Or perhaps, I don't know, but...
Definitely the Get Down, there's a forbidden love in the Get Down, where the young church girl, the young hip-hop guy like each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Perhaps the forbidden love then in Elvis is the musical styles, actually. So it isn't a love story between, the traditional sort of man and woman, different side of the tracks, but it's the music from different side of the tracks. And Elvis being raised in an evangelical... No, actually, not so much, but being influenced by the evangelical Christian, the Pentecostal Christian singing, the gospel... and then effectively making black music or being accused of and that sort of thing. So maybe
I thought they dealt with that nuance really well, because I was sitting there thinking, okay, they need to honour the fact that this music came from the black communities in Memphis, but and also I guess acknowledge what Elvis's music did for that music in the mainstream, but not overstate it, because at the end of the day he effectively took it and became very successful out of it. And I thought they did a really good job of just highlighting the situation, not trying to make any apologies or excuses for Elvis, and not overstating his influence. Yeah. In that sense,
and again, because I am not wedded to truth or any kind of narrative around that, I'm just like, oh, fantastic, beautiful, great.
Right. Well, it seems like a lot of the response around Elvis has been pretty positive from Elvis fans and from his family. And he's reading responses from, Priscilla and his daughter. Like, everyone's really, really positive about this movie.
That's good, isn't it?
Yeah, and talking about how it honours his legacy in a way that feels real, and talking about Tom Parker as well, and people's, memories of him versus what he was portrayed as in the media. So yeah, it seemed like it really did a lot of things right.
Yes.
Yeah. This film's been a long time in the making as well. Like, I know Baz Luhrmann's been wanting to make this Elvis film for at least 10 years. I know that he was talking about it even way back when Australia came out. So it must have been a long time in the making. I kind of miss the days of DVDs, because you would get the making ofs and the
I love all
we
that.
don't really see that. We get a little bit of it on YouTube, but then it's a bit different to...
Sometimes if you buy the digital version on Apple, they have additional materials.
Do you ever buy anything on Apple?
Not really.
Like, it's just all streaming now, isn't it? And it would be nice if they packaged some of that stuff up with the streaming. So if you wait for streaming, you get to see the making of. I used to love buying my DVDs or my Blu-rays, and then you'd watch the movie, and then you'd go and
watch all the Easter eggs,
the commentaries.
Right.
You have to find the Easter eggs.
That's right.
That was such a great time. The best one was the Lord of the Rings extended editions. You remember that? They folded out. And,
The 90s was a good time. Watching Strictly Ballroom reminded me, because that was, I guess, certainly 92 onwards. Literally, I started uni in 92, and that was very much a coming of age for me in terms of going to the Capitol Cinema in Auckland. That was absolutely, it was retrospectives, it was indie, it was gritty. It was the place that I saw Reservoir Dogs and all that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So yeah. So for me, watching or rewatching Strictly Ballroom was going back to a time when cinema was more magical than, I don't know, Marvel makes it.
Well, I mean, Elvis is like the Marvel version of a Baz Luhrmann movie, isn't it? And I hear, there is something to be said, and we talk about this a lot, but I think back then you had your Reservoir Dogs, you had your, New Zealand film was really taking off.
Yes.
There was a lot of significant
Scarface
films
and whatnot.
Well, I mean, that was 96, I think. I'm thinking like Heavenly Creatures and Lots of Warriors.
And My Father's Den and all those kind of.
What
was that later?
Piano, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Piano,
93, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big time of, there's 90s and early 2000s. It was a really significant time.
And you've mentioned Priscilla as well.
So
right?
Antipodean, I think we could call that Antipodean or Australasian cinema, guys.
But with Reservoir Dogs, right? It's just the indie cinema, and I've heard arguments that Lord of the Rings kind of killed New Zealand cinema, which people can go either way. They're like, it either really exploded it onto the world stage, or it kind of squashed a lot of the indie films that were really starting to come up through the system through the 90s.
It's probably a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, it made our industry explode because it gave millions, that's hyperbole, millions of people work, and it put us on the world stage in terms of being a filmmaking country. But obviously, God bless it, The Hobbit and all that is not an Indigenous or a New Zealand and Aotearoa story. So maybe opportunities were lost for indie, more indie New Zealand flicks to be made, but who's to know? If we had continued with our cinema of unease, which arguably we do, would the appetite have got to the point where we're like, we don't actually want to watch that anymore, and actually we want to consume the films from overseas? And you think about Game of Thrones, right, which I have not seen, but I know a little bit about. There is an appetite for that sort of saga, that sort of fantasy, that sort of thing, in which case you've got to be producing your Lord of the Rings and your Star Warses and your Mandalorians and whatnot, in order to be relevant, in order to have an industry.
You bring up cinema of the unease, which for listeners who don't know, that's a phrase that was coined by
Sam Neill
in his documentary, and how New Zealand cinema has a real darkness about it for all of its... Even Taika Waititi's films have a real darkness about it,
but certainly through the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah.
When, I can't remember when Sam Neill coined that phrase, but that was the sort of the 70s, 80s, 90s, I think, that he was...
But Australian cinema doesn't have that. Australian cinema has a real life about it and positivity, and I think there is some darkness in those films. Like Muriel's Wedding is a very dark movie at times, but
the Mad Max films.
Yeah, true. But I mean, there's a different energy about it. There's a more of a manic.
Babe 2, Pick in the City.
Cosi, have you seen Cosi?
No.
That's a film that I'm sure you couldn't make now, but it was a lot of the staples. So it has Toni Collette and Jackie Weaver and Otto, Barry Otto, who's the father in Strictly Ballroom. And it's a young man who is a drama graduate, and he goes into an institution for people with mental and intellectual disabilities and creates an opera with them. So there's lots of great Australian actors doing quote-unquote hilarious characters who have intellectual disabilities. So I don't think the film will have aged well. Okay. But
that rings a bell. Is it
I remember loving...
As in Cosi fan tutte, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great... I remember being a great movie, but it's probably not aged well in terms of its politics.
Is Quills Australian? It stars Australians.
Yeah. I can't remember who directed Quills. It's Jeffrey Rush.
Yeah,
and it's a period piece.
With Kate Winslet's in it.
And I think about Lantana, which was I think Anthony LaPaglia. Before, that Anthony LaPaglia is an Aussie.
Yeah.
Who basically has forged a career out of being American. And Lantana, was Gabriel Byrne in that as well? Maybe Jeffrey Rush, can't remember. But that's your more kind of your indie, your gritty crime drama Australian kind of unsolved murder mystery. I used to love stuff like that. But I agree with you that but Australia's bigger than us, right? So maybe they have the opportunity to have these big, beautiful, colourful, exuberant coming-of-age stories like Priscilla, because there's always people against odds, but also being exuberant and colourful and wonderful.
Yeah.
I can't think of New Zealand examples like that in quite the same way.
I mean, Peter Jackson, right? He's the biggest example, and his films are like hilarious, colourful, and incredibly violent. You know, all of his pre-Lord of the Rings stuff is some of the most violent cinema in history. But it does have a quality of
the Joie de Vivre.
I wouldn't say it's unease. I wouldn't say it's unease. It's like punch you in the face, kind of with blood and gore. But yeah.
And I mean, going back to what we were talking about with era and period. Again, I think we've all mentioned this several times throughout the course of this podcast, but movies of the early 90s just there's something special about them. The way things are lit, the way, everything feels not just tangible, but almost that you are present in a way, like hyper real in a way.
Yes.
And I think the comparison couldn't be more different between, again, Baz Luhrmann back in 92 and Baz Luhrmann in 2022.
Yeah.
Where so much of what makes Strictly Ballroom tick is the fact that everything is so in your face and physical. And in my opinion, it's just something that's completely lacking from Elvis. Yeah, I think some of the dancing is fine, but it just feels like, as you guys were mentioning, a Marvel movie. Everything is very, very carefully, digitally put together. And it doesn't feel like it has any presence.
It's very perfect.
Yeah.
It is and musically, Elvis is a very perfect film. It all totally works.
Yeah. I would say perfect, but also in some places really messy as well. How they do, all the cross cuts and the quick edits of CGI roulettes and morphine and stuff like that.
But not messy as in unthought of. That's what I mean more. Is that it feels, that does not feel to me like a mistake. That feels to me like a relentless banging on the head of, you've got 3 milliseconds to look at this frame because we're now switching.
But then I watch something like this and I think of stuff like Gaspar Noé's work. And when Gaspar Noé does it, it's even in his very, very not very good movies, it's always there with a real sense of purpose, and it feels like everything is paced well, and the images that flash before your eyes have been edited within an inch of their lives. I did not feel that way with Elvis.
You didn't?
It felt really haphazard and like, here we go again.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe my feelings towards Elvis were just going down that slippery slope.
No, I hear you, William, but I felt that with Great Gatsby, and that it was like, because there's a certain element of messiness in Australia, which we've talked about. Great Gatsby for me felt that way, and it felt really overly long. And one of the things I love about Moulin Rouge, which does employ a lot of CGI and model work and composite work, is that it does it very intentionally, and you know that it's happening, and it's part of the kind of dollhouse nature of is it Montmartre?
Yeah.
It makes it feel like it's this little playground, and then when they go into the Moulin Rouge, it's real. Like there are real dark. There are people hanging off the walls. It's a huge set. It feels great. Or the scene in Romeo and Juliet, the party sequence. It's this, which is the same year as the Titanic, right? Which is the real people and real buildings and real spaces that you feel it, and it's huge and it's exciting, and I want to go there. Also, just side note, in Romeo and Juliet, there's a scene where Romeo and Juliet, Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio, they first meet, and he's in the knight outfit, she's in the angel outfit, and they run into the lift and they kiss, and the camera goes around them. So that sequence, the camera couldn't fit in the lift. So what they did is they designed a version of the lift where all of the octagon panels lifted up as the camera rotated around.
That's clever.
Awesome.
And then the panels got lowered back down again as the camera kind of got that part of the lift into view. And I'm like, this is so great. This is the kind of movie magic that I don't know, I didn't even know that there was an effect that they were doing, but it's so exciting.
There are a lot of, I don't know what that shot's called. I always think of it as the Reservoir Dogs kind of going around the table shot, but there's a lot of that in Strictly Ballroom as well.
Scott when he's spinning and it does that wonderful cut to the
that's one. I love that. That's so. It reminds me of West Side Story, where they hide it in West Side Story with kind of a blurry dissolve in, but this is a hard cut straight into the competition.
What's so cool about that?
Like we are in the third act. Boom.
And it's you're so right. It is the third act, isn't it? Because I think what happens is that we're building up to everything. They finally kiss him and Fran, and he says, "I think I was wrong about the dance of love being pretend." and we have the Love Is in the Air refrain come in, and then he goes and he hears the story from Barry Fife, which, by the way, was going to be filmed for real. They were going to film it realistically, the backstory, but they ran out of time and money, and so they decided to do it as a stylized piece, which I think makes it better. Yeah. But you know, he's going to. The whole film's building up to him doing this moment, and then he sort of believes that he's letting his dad down, and so in that cut, it's like even when I still now watch it with people, I think, I wonder if people know that this is actually happening. It's almost like it's a fantasy. Has he really just ditched Fran? Is he really with Liz? Like, is that really what's going on? And it just sets up the wonderful tension of the final act of the film. Yeah.
So did you tell me, I know that Paul Mercurio was actually a dancer for real, but Tara Maurice, no?
No, and she worked with the dance coach.
Didn't she do a good job?
It's fantastic. I mean, the funny thing about Strictly Ballroom is there's actually not that much dancing in it. You know, it's a dance film with a little dancing. He's fantastic, but a lot of the stuff at the start with Liz is if you watch it. I mean, I've watched it now so many times that I can see when it's the dance double and when it's Liz the actor. But the same with Tara. I think they had a dance double in, but she did a lot of it herself as well.
It reminded me of Dirty Dancing a lot. Dirty Dancing. Yeah. But was that from the 88 or something? So obviously it predates it. But the whole kind of, I'm the man who knows how to dance and I shall take you under my wing. Except that in this film, it's the grandmother tapping on the chest and saying, feel it here. Yeah. And I'm like, you got that on Patrick Swayze.
I mean, it's true.
It is true as well. So yeah.
I guess it's drawing from that 80s tradition, right? Of Footloose and Flashdance and the dance movies of the 80s. And
I'm going to do it my own way. And this is the rebelliousness, which again, and here's maybe our ending, comes back to Elvis, who danced the way that he wanted to dance, even though all that hip swinging and everything was going to scandalize and, virtually make women pregnant just by looking at it.
I love the moment when the woman starts involuntarily screaming.
Oh, that's a wonderful scene. And it's shot in super slow motion.
Yeah.
You just see the micro expressions in her face. And then Tom Hanks is narrating over that. And it's like, oh, this is really good. This is really, really good.
And what an interesting point. Like, these audiences are feeling something they don't know they should enjoy. And I'm like, what a great way of capturing, mass entertainment. Because we still see that today, right? The things that capture people are a little bit scandalous. We're not sure if we should really be enjoying this.
But it happens to you rather than, you've got no control over it. Lovely.
Right, final thoughts. William, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I think I said it all. I basically want to say I really enjoyed Strictly Ballroom. It's also just a really beautiful movie. There's some shots that I was surprised at how pretty it was, where they're dancing beside the train tracks, and you see the backdrop of a train passing by, and it's just super blurry, but it's movement, and then it cuts to a shot of the front of the train, and you see the overall geographic placement of everybody, and it's like, oh, that's super nice.
The most expensive shot in the film.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
So really, really enjoyed it. And also just the sense of, kind of democratizing of something that was very, very gate-kept was something very, very late 80s, early 90s. Enjoyed it quite a bit. Elvis, it's all right, I guess. I just ended up really, really not enjoying it by the end of the movie.
Cool. I mean, Elvis, I had a really great time, as I said, until I feel the movie should have ended. But, Baz Luhrmann, what I love about him is his collaborative nature. He collaborates incredibly generously with his team, and he's had that team for a long time. Every film he collaborates with musical artists and creates really interesting albums. So I kind of feel like that's really hard to capture lightning in a bottle when you are bringing in so many other voices. And so I'm okay to have a messy Elvis film that is really exciting in parts, just like I'm okay to have a messy Australia and a messy Great Gatsby, because every now and again you might get the get down, So I'm all for that. I'm definitely over this whole genre. It doesn't.
A musical biopic?
Yeah, musical biopic. At least for the next wee while. Let's wait for some of our 90s and
until they do a Lady Gaga one, Jeremy.
Well, it's called Joker 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm waiting, ready for that to kind of take a rest and come back in about 15 years. Strictly Ballroom is one of my top 10 favourite films of all time. It's incredibly nostalgic for me. I talked about that in the last podcast, the situation with which I was introduced to the film. It's the movie that always works for an outdoor movie night or a group movie night because people can kind of talk through bits of it and it's still okay. And everybody that I've introduced this movie to has fallen in love with it. And I'm always a little bit nervous that it will do that, but every time people really connect with Strictly Ballroom, there's something so wonderfully joyful, and I can quote this movie. And actually, I played it for William and Sarah, which I didn't record that fresh, by the way. This is something that I recorded for my friend a couple of years ago. So this is me doing a clip from Strictly Ballroom, and then I'm going to pass it to Sarah. Here we go. Look, a beginner has no right to approach an open amateur. Yeah, well, an open amateur has no right to dance non-federation steps, but you did, didn't you? But that's different. How is it different? You're just like the rest of them. You think you're different, but you're not because you're just really scared. You're really scared to give someone new a go because you think, they might just be better than you are. Well, you're just pathetic and you're gutless. You're a gutless wonder. Vivia, come on, Vivia, miras. So there you go. Over to you, Sarah.
Well, had no expectations for Elvis. Totally loved it. Didn't remember specifically what I thought of Strictly Ballroom, other than I'd enjoyed it a million years ago when I was young and naive, and I thought it was a smashingly good time. Final little point of trivia, you fellas might already know this. I looked up Baz Luhrmann. I was like, what kind of name is that? Now, we'll all know that the Australians often give one another nicknames.
Like so Baz.
You'd think his name was Barry or something, and they called him Baz, but apparently, and you may or may not already know this, that when he was at school, he had a bit of an afro, and he was bullied. Well, that's not surprising, I think, knowing Baz the way we know him now. And the kids called him Basil Brush. And so he decided, in this wonderful way that some people have, to embrace that. And he changed his name by deed poll to be, he changed his name by deed poll. His name is Mark Anthony Luhrmann, and he changed it to be Mark Anthony Baz Luhrmann. And so, when the titles come up at the beginning and it says a Baz Mark production, and that's Baz Mark, and that's him. So there we go. So Baz was not his born name, but he took it from the bullying and made it his own.
Wow. I love that.
Bloody good on him.
I didn't know that. And I'm now wiser for it.
There you are, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, did we want to sneak in any little accents at the end?
Nah.
Let's wrap this
just keep talking normally, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context through SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Amazon Music. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode or give us suggestions for future films to discuss and compare. Look out for our next episode in a month's time, which will be on Thor Love and Thunder and Cabin in the Woods. And until then, no hora mai!